Closing in on Kyiv. Civilian buildings come under fire as Russian forces near the Ukrainian capital. An apartment block 4 miles from the city centre, struck by an enemy shell as Kyiv braces for the battle to come.
There's destruction everywhere, and yet over there is a school. Over there is a nursery. This is a residential area.
Could this be what's coming? The total devastation of Mariupol, a city laid waste. Well, as the conflict enters its third week, what chance do the peace talks have of stopping the slaughter? Also tonight, rehousing the refugees of war. 1,500 sign up to open their homes in the first hour of Britain's new resettlement scheme. At 7 o'clock, Shevchenko speaks out. Ukraine's most famous footballer on his old boss, Abramovich, the tragedy in his homeland and the power of his sport.
Football society, football in generally, is sent very strong message. We want the peace.
Good evening. Russian forces are moving ever closer to the heart of Kyiv, with a residential housing block the latest civilian target. The building, just a few miles from the city centre, was hit in overnight shelling. It's in the middle of a residential area packed with civilians. Once again, there was no apparent military target anywhere near. ITV news cameras filmed the destruction inside the apartment block and heard from one of the residents who survived. It came as talks resumed between Russian and Ukrainian representatives, this time via video link. From the scene of the attack, our global security editor, Rohit Katru, sent this report.
9 stories high, where hundreds lived. And 2 people died, killed by one man's war. They knew it was creeping closer to home, but they couldn't have expected it to strike so suddenly in the place where they lived.
Потім прибирали серед уламків до неї. Текла вода, був перебитий трубопровід, текла вода, а сусідня квартира горіла.
People were brought out, then their belongings too, revealing it wasn't weapons destroyed, but pots and pans and toiletries instead. If Ukraine's defences were the intended target, the wrong place was hit. It would be more worrying if this was the intended target. Briefly, we were shown inside. You can hear the crunch of possessions turned to debris. In this flat, only the TV and the treadmill were left intact. Doors blown off, windows smashed, lives crushed, and not a potential military target in sight. There's destruction everywhere, and yet over there is a school, over there is a nursery. This is a residential area, and these buildings were packed not with soldiers, but with civilians. Close to the nearest hospital, missiles flew. As those killed in Putin's advance were taken away. In the corridor, a Russian soldier sent for the invasion who won't be returning home. Outside, an injured Ukrainian soldier. Anton had been working on a farm in Yorkshire until last week when war brought him home.
I leave my girlfriend in UK and came here.
To fight this war?
Yes.
And this morning what happened?
Artillery started working. They hit me.
You were hit in the leg?
Yeah. But everything is okay.
But there was another strike closer to the centre of the city. An intercepted Russian missile, one person killed, vehicles destroyed, and a question. What next? Rohit Katru, ITV News, Kyiv.
Well, there was an alarming glimpse today of the kind of destruction that could be coming Kyiv's way. Mariupol has been under siege for days and its people relentlessly pounded by bombs. Hundreds of thousands of civilians are still trapped inside. Now, there are reports that some have finally managed to flee as pictures show the extent of the damage. And a warning that this report by Europe editor James Mates contains images that you may well find upsetting.
They have turned the seaside city of Mariupol into a cauldron of hell. Shattered and blackened, beneath the pall of acrid black smoke, there are still hundreds of thousands of people down there. And still, the bombs and the guns pound at the ruins. 2,000 have died here, but for once the victims are not anonymous statistics. For once the aftermath of a bombing here at the city's maternity hospital was filmed for the world to see. A mother in labour was rushed to an ambulance, her pelvis crushed, her baby in grave danger. None of her rescuers ever knew her name, and nor did the doctors who tried in vain to save mother and child. While we were resuscitating her, we carried out a cesarean and took out her lifeless child, he said. For more than 30 minutes we tried to resuscitate both mother and child, but it didn't produce any results. Both died. There was one other haunting image that day. Mariana Vyshegorskaya standing, bleeding and dazed, wrapped in her bedclothes. She gave birth to a daughter, Veronica, only too aware of how lucky they'd both been.
We were all together in the wards. Some of us had time to cover ourselves, some didn't.
The Russian propaganda machine, not content with the inhumanity of the bombing, had claimed these victims were faked. Crisis actors, they called them. Nor are those still living in the rubble and under the guns fakes or actors. They are families for whom help and evacuation may just be getting underway, at least a week too late. The peace negotiators are meeting again, this time by video link, with the Ukrainians demanding a ceasefire and troop withdrawal before substantive issues can be discussed. President Zelensky, still defiantly in the open air, concedes that progress is at best limited. We should hold and fight and win so that we can have peace, he said. Honest peace with security guarantees. The talks are difficult. Realistically, the fighting is a long way from being over. So far, in almost 3 weeks of war, nothing has been decisive, and neither side has reason to want to give up.
The United States has warned China that it will face consequences if it gives Russia military aid or helps it evade sanctions. US officials claim Moscow made a request for help to its allies in Beijing, but China accused America of spreading disinformation. Well, in just a moment, we're going to have the latest from our Asia correspondent Debbie Edward in Beijing. But first, let's return to our Europe editor James Mates, who's in Kyiv. James, how significant is this warning from the US?
Well, they're pretty serious about it. This slightly came out of left field yesterday when US intelligence revealed that a request had been made from the Kremlin to China for help with arms and munitions. Now, the Kremlin has denied that, but they've denied a lot of stuff before. Today, the Chinese and Americans met on a pre-arranged meeting, nothing to do with this, in Rome, at a pretty high level. The Americans seem to have come away with the firm message that China would be prepared to supply such weapons to the Russians in support of their invasion. Now, this really will have surprised Washington, given the Western unity in terms of disconnecting Russia from basically the Western financial and trading system. They had assumed that China would not want to be heading down the same sort of road. It does, of course, raise the question, why would Russia need this? The second biggest military in the world, as they keep telling us, and we're only in the third week of the war, and already they're having to ask for help. But I think it's specifically in terms of precision-guided munitions and missiles, and in terms of drones that they are very short of on the battlefield here.
OK, James, it's in Kyiv for the moment. Thank you. And turning to Debbie. Debbie, what are the authorities in Beijing saying about this?
Well, China has dismissed as slander and disinformation, basically fake news, these claims coming from the US that Russia has requested its military assistance. The two countries may have presented themselves as having a relationship with no limits, and we do know they have a strong trade in military weapons and hardware, mostly coming from Russia into China. But there's one thing to remember, Mary, when trying to calculate China's actions. It will act first and foremost in its own self-interest. The priorities of the Chinese government are domestic stability, economic strength and its global standing. It can continue to trade with Russia while avoiding sanctions itself. It can even justify the invasion on the grounds of NATO expansion. But I think it seems absolutely out far afield that it would join Ukraine militarily. There's just too much at stake for President Xi. China has even made it a policy not to get involved in foreign wars. So I think it's not about to start now joining a side which apparently seems so desperate enough to ask for some help.
OK, Debbie Edward in Beijing, thank you. More details were given in Parliament today about a scheme encouraging people across the UK to open up their homes to Ukrainian refugees. Hosts can nominate a person or family to stay for at least 6 months. They will receive a monthly payment and the first matches will start this week. But Labour says there is a lack of urgency from the government and refugees will still need to complete lengthy forms to get a visa first.